They want to go inside. Yeah, you know, it's just, I think that's just, they can just wipe it in like 2 minutes. Greg.
Must be coming this way.
Yeah. Yeah, go back, chill, cool off. I'll let you know. I'm good. Come back and chill. Thank you.
Here they come.
We got your bag, man. Hang in there.
How are you? Good to see you.
Gentlemen, gentlemen, Senator. Hey,
Mike Lee. All right. Nice to see you. Good to see you, Brett. Thank you, Mr. Weber. Had a really good chat. How are you? I'm enjoying.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are here this morning for a very important reason, as you all know, because there is currently an unprecedented and a clear and present danger to the integrity of our election system. And that is the threat of non-citizens and illegal aliens voting in our elections. In the last 5.5 months or so, I've been to over 101 cities doing events all around the country in more than half the states. The first or second question that I am asked in every public forum is about election security. Americans are deeply concerned about this, and it doesn't matter where you live and whether you're in a blue state or a red state, everyone's concerned. And due to the wide open border that the Biden administration has refused to close, in fact, that they engineered to open, we now have so many non-citizens in the country that if only 1 out of 100 of those voted, they would cast hundreds of thousands of votes. And since our elections are so razor thin in these days that we're in, and just a few precincts in a few states decide the makeup of Congress and who is elected to the White House, this is a dangerously high number, and it is a great concern to millions and millions of Americans. It could obviously change the outcome of our elections, and this is not an empty threat or concern. I'll let my colleague Chip Roy here in a moment get into the specifics of the SAVE Act, but I want to address why we need this legislation. Some have noted that it's already a crime for non-citizens to vote in a federal election, and that is true. But here are 4 things that are also true. Number 1, it's true that no current mechanism to ensure only those registering or voting are actually citizens. There's no mechanism that exists to make sure that's correct. If a nefarious actor wants to intervene in our elections, all they have to do is check a box on a form and sign their name. That's it. That's all that's required. And there's a very small chance that illegal would get caught, because here's the other thing. Our states do not have the election infrastructure in place to confirm what they've said. Number 2, it's true that Joe Biden has welcomed millions and millions of illegal aliens. We think the number, I believe the number is close to probably, at this point, 16 million illegals who have come into this country since Joe Biden walked into the Oval Office. That includes sophisticated criminal syndicates and agents of adversarial governments here in our borders and even on humanitarian parole. And that means the millions that have been paroled can simply go to their local welfare office or the DMV and register to vote there. And please understand this. States are currently prohibited from asking somebody to prove that they're a citizen when they use the federal voter registration form. Third truth, it is also true that a growing number of localities are blurring the lines for non-citizens by allowing them to vote in municipal local elections. In cities and towns in California, in Maryland, Vermont, and even right here in D.C. You might not know this, but non-citizens are voting. Number four, it's true that Democrats have expressed a desire to turn non-citizens into voters. That's what this open border has been all about. Former Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler admitted that to me, expressly stated it to me in a committee hearing in a video that's gone viral just last year, a year and a half ago. Stacey Abrams said it in 2018 on the campaign trail. In their rare moments of candor, they will tell you the truth that this is something they are for. 2 months ago, every Senate Democrat voted to count illegal aliens in the census to help them shore up more seats in Congress and more votes in the Electoral College. And this week, House Democrats will also have an opportunity to go on record on the same issue. In recent days, we've seen a growing number of folks on student visas show their willingness to break the law and utterly disrupt our way of life and threaten law-abiding students who are actually American citizens. If they're willing to take over buildings and physically terrorize their fellow students, why would they not be willing to lie on a voter registration form? It's clear that our election process is worth protecting. It is our responsibility as members of Congress and concerned leaders of citizens groups and organizations who care about the integrity of our system and our elections. It is our duty to ensure that this is done. Even if you weren't concerned about the drop boxes and the ballot harvesting and the mail-in ballots in 2020, you definitely should be concerned that illegal aliens might be voting in 2024. And that's why it is critical that we pass the SAVE Act to safeguard our federal elections and ensure that only Americans get to decide American elections. I'm going to turn it over now to my good friend and colleague, Chip Roy. I want to thank him and Senator Mike Lee for their important work on this. And they and a few other of our friends and leaders on this issue will have a few comments here in rapid succession for you.
Well, I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his leadership on this issue. I want to thank him for putting together this press conference. I want to thank Mike Lee for his leadership in the Senate and for all of these great patriots behind me and their hard work in making sure that we could put this legislation forward. And this issue, generally, that the Speaker just described about the state of our border, the state of immigration, the extent of the lawlessness that is going on, has been well documented recently in the press. When you talk about people coming across the border, you talk about the impact on citizens such as Laken Riley, who was obviously murdered by someone paroled, contrary to our existing law, by this administration releasing people under parole. We're having a budget committee hearing as we speak that I'm going to go back to, where Chairman Arrington, fellow Texan, is laying out the cost of illegal immigration and the extent to which it's a massive burden on, for example, Kinney County, Texas, who is represented in that hearing, who prior to the Biden administration had about 140 or so crimes per year. Last year, they had 6,700. 6,700. The impact on this nation and this state on Joe Biden's reckless open borders cannot be overstated. But here's the thing. These open borders are undermining the core principle of the rule of law. As we stand here looking across at the United States Supreme Court, we stand here in front of this building, the Capitol building. The rule of law is what sets our nation apart. The rule of law is what attracts immigrants to want to come to the United States. Yet we're undermining it every single day. And the most fundamental thing you can do to destroy the rule of law and to destroy our republic is to undermine faith in elections and undermine the integrity of our elections and to destroy this republic by making it unclear as to who is voting and limiting the ability for us to know that only citizens are voting. And that's why we're here. We're here for the simple proposition supported by the vast majority of the American people that only citizens of the United States should vote, that we should have documentary proof, that we should have a system to guarantee that only citizens of the United States vote in federal elections where we have the clear authority under the Constitution of the United States and our laws as Congress to set the terms of those elections. That is what we are doing. Nothing more complicated than that. And anybody who tries to overcomplicate it or say that this is something else or motivated by something else are wrong. This is about the rule of law, ensuring the integrity of elections, and the simple proposition that only citizens should vote. I look forward to working with my colleagues and these excellent friends to make sure we get this legislation passed. We've got to make sure that we protect this republic, and this is, I think, a giant step towards doing that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Senator Mike Lee.
Thank you. We have a couple of sayings that carry significance on Capitol Hill. One of them is, if everything's an emergency, then nothing is. Another one is, if everyone's family, then no one is. That one also has special significance in my state where we have really large families, so it gets a little more complicated there. But the idea is that it does matter to be a citizen. And if you are not a citizen, there are certain things that implies. One citizen, one vote. That's how it's supposed to work. That's how it's always been. That's what federal law currently requires. But when federal law has been interpreted as precluding in many ways the voter registration officials in the various states from even inquiring into someone's citizenship when addressing voter roll issues, we have a problem. So this is a piece of legislation that we should pass right away. It's legislation that really ought to pass unanimously in both houses of Congress very, very quickly. Because the only reason to oppose this that I couldn't think of would be if you're comfortable with or even somehow want non-citizens to vote. And non-citizens, in some cases, to influence the outcome of elections and make them different. Look, we all know that that's a problem. Just think about this for a minute. Nobody knows for sure how many non-citizens live in the United States, so we have to rely on estimates. Estimates are that the number of people who have entered this country unlawfully since Joe Biden became president, somewhere between 10 and 12 million. And there are estimates putting the total number of non-citizens in this country somewhere approaching 30 million. If those estimates are accurate, that would mean that roughly 1 in 11 or 1 in 12 people currently residing in the United States happens to be a non-citizen. This is not an academic exercise, especially when you consider that in some parts of the country, their numbers may be disproportionately represented. There is not a good, legitimate reason to oppose this bill. In fact, there are all kinds of things that would be wrong with this institution if it failed immediately to pass this bill and send it to the president for his signature. We can all acknowledge that federal law prohibits non-citizens from voting in federal elections. And the fact that we don't have any mechanism in place currently to bring that about is folly. Look, every time you go just about anywhere, do just about anything, you can see examples of where you have to prove who you are. Something as simple as starting a job. You know you're going to have to show up, you're going to have to process all the I-9 paperwork. And if you're a U.S. citizen, you're going to need to show up with either your birth certificate or a U.S. passport indicating that you once have demonstrated proof of your citizenship and of your U.S. birth. So why shouldn't some of those same standards apply, making exceptions in the absence of available documentary proof where necessary, when registering to vote? This is a sacred responsibility, one that we can't treat lightly. We owe it to ourselves, to each other, and most importantly to the American people, to make sure that those making decisions on behalf of our government and who's going to serve in government in elective office are indeed empowered to make those decisions. The Constitution and our commitment to it requires nothing less. Thank you. It really is an honor, I will add, to introduce this legislation with my friend and colleague, Congressman Chip Roy, who has done yeoman's work in this. It's an honor to stand here with him and with Speaker Johnson and with so many other allies in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, we already have a growing list of co-sponsors, including Senators Kramer, Cruz, Tuberville, Marshall, Budd, Kennedy and Scott of Florida. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Cleta Mitchell. I'm the founder of the Election Integrity Network, and I'm the president of the Fair Elections Fund. 30 years ago, Congress enacted a statute that requires every state Department of Motor Vehicles driver's license agency to register people to vote when they come into the DMV. It also requires social services agencies to register people to vote. But over the years, in 2013, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that states could not add additional requests for proof of citizenship when registering to vote. This bill, the Safeguarding American Voter Eligibility Act, the SAVE Act, remedies that flawed situation that Congress created, but created at a time when America's immigration laws were being enforced. This bill would, in addition to making it possible and mandatory for states to require proof of citizenship for individuals to register to vote, it would also make it a crime, a federal crime, for someone to knowingly register a non-citizen to vote. And that's particularly important when we see the millions of dollars, tax dollars that are being spent, our tax dollars being spent, paying leftist NGOs to shepherd illegals into the country. The Department of Human Services says they don't know where they are. So wherever they are, wherever they may be, whatever the plan is to try to manipulate this year's election with illegals voting in our elections, this bill is essential to make sure that we put a stop to that we raise citizens' awareness. And in that regard, I'm announcing today that we are launching the Only Citizens Vote Coalition, which at this time has over 70 local, state, and national members, and we are going to help make aware the American people, educate them about the dangers of non-citizen voting, and to take steps at the local, state, and federal level to ensure that only citizens vote in U.S. elections. Thank you.
I'm Jenny Beth Martin, the honorary chairman of Tea Party Patriots Action, and I support 3 million activists around the country. I'm here today to stand with Speaker Johnson and Congressman Roy and Senator Lee and other members of Congress and leaders to declare our support for the SAVE Act. And while I'm at it, I've been asked by Ken Blackwell, chairman of the Conservative Actions Project, to declare his support for the bill as well. He could not be here with us today. 3 months ago, Tea Party Patriots Action commissioned a national poll conducted by John McLaughlin. His findings were not surprising to those of us who've worked on election integrity for the last several years. Overwhelming majorities of American people believe only United States citizens should vote in United States elections. 86% of Americans agree on this. Overwhelming majorities of Americans agree that proof of citizenship should be required to register to vote. 87% of Americans agree on this. That is exactly what the SAVE Act does. It amends the motor voter law to require that states obtain documentary proof of citizenship before they can register someone to vote. It's already illegal for non-citizens to vote. But just because something is illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen. If you're not a citizen, it's illegal to enter our country without authorization. But that happens multiple millions of times every year. We're trying to get ahead of the curve here. That's why we support the SAVE Act, and we thank the Speaker, Congressman Roy, and Senator Lee for their efforts, and we'll do everything we can at Tea Party Patriots Action to help get this enacted into law. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Johnson. Thank you, Chip. Good friend Mike Lee, known for such a long time, and all the patriots here today. Democracy in America is under attack. It's a multifaceted attack being waged by Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress. We see that attack in the form of censorship of conservative speech, the weaponization of law enforcement against peaceful American citizens for having conservative or Christian beliefs, and we see it in the lawfare against President Trump, in New York City, in Georgia, in D.C., and in many other places all across this country where the power of the state is being used to crush political dissent. But there's one more form of radical attack on democracy, and that is the combination of a wide open border and obstruction of any effort to verify the citizenship of who votes in our elections. These things are all combined in effort to end our Republican form of government. When you have no border, when you have millions of unvetted foreigners from over 150 countries pouring into this nation with no way, no legal ability, let alone a legal requirement to verify that they are citizens, you are inviting grand foreign interference in our elections on an unprecedented scale for the sole purpose of helping Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. When this bill comes to a vote, it will be the most important vote that most members of Congress take in their entire careers. If Hakeem Jeffries and his Democrat members try to kill this bill, they will be declaring to the whole country that they want Joe Biden's illegals to vote in this election. That will be what they are declaring. And every American citizen should pay attention and take note, because this will be a dividing line from which there will be no return, no going back, no hiding, no erasing your record. Either you believe in an American nation for American citizens or you don't. That is what this vote will show. And I encourage every single reporter here today to treat this with the gravity and gravitas it deserves and it necessitates. Because if this bill does not become law, then Joe Biden and Democrats will have engineered one of the greatest interferences in any democratic nation in the history of the world. Thank you.
That was Stephen Miller. Surprised you need him identified. I'm Ken Cuccinelli. I'm the chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative. Honored to be here today with Representative Roy, Senator Lee, and Speaker Johnson, and other members. Some people will ask, and so I'm going to answer the question preemptively, why is this needed? And you've heard explanations about failures in the system under the NVRA to protect America's elections against non-citizens voting. That dilutes actual citizens' votes. Only 2 and 3 years ago, we were here on Capitol Hill arguing about the Democrats' takeover of elections under H.R. 1. And you need look no farther than their own legislation to see why the SAVE Act is needed. In Section 1012 of that bill, they mandated that states dump millions of aliens onto their voter rolls. Go read the bill. That's what Section 1012 would have done. That's what it was designed to do. You note it says adults, not citizens, be dumped onto their voter rolls with automatic voter registration. In Section 1015 of that bill, it decriminalized those same foreigners from voting in American elections and diluting Americans' votes. Completely decriminalized it. So while it's illegal today, anyone registered under their H.R. 1 would not suffer any penalties. That, of course, is an open invitation for those millions of non-Americans to vote and change the outcome of our elections. And as if that weren't good enough, they couldn't let it sit without intimidating state and local officials with a new crime in Section 1201 to threaten any state or local official who might try to keep their voter rolls clean. And we've seen with Soros prosecutors and with this out-of-control weaponized federal government, they are perfectly willing to prosecute state and local officials who just want to do their job and just want to keep their voter rolls clean to just protect their own communities. The SAVE Act is very much needed, and I'm Ken Cuccinelli, chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, and we're pleased to be here to support this effort. Thank you all.
Good morning. I'm Rosemary Jenks with the Immigration Accountability Project. As Senator Lee said, we estimate that there are upwards of 30 million non-citizens, so foreign-born who have not naturalized and are therefore ineligible to vote under our laws. The problem that we have now is that the Biden administration, there's a Biden executive order that orders all federal agencies to provide voter registration information to everyone they come in contact with. We also know that state election officials are not permitted to ask for proof of citizenship for applicants who fill out the federal form. So if you're a non-citizen in this country, whether you're an asylum seeker or a foreign student or whatever, if a government official hands you a voter registration form, you're going to think that you need to fill it out. Then you are going to be unlawfully registered to vote. If you vote, it is a deportable criminal offense. So I want to just do a little public service announcement here and say, if you are not a citizen of the United States of America, you are ineligible to vote. And if you vote, you are committing a criminal deportable offense. We need to pass the SAVE Act and secure our elections. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Andy Roth. I'm president of the State Freedom Caucus Network. Our organization's mission is to help conservative lawmakers across the country launch and maintain state freedom caucuses. We have 11 of them across the country, including the great state of Louisiana. And today I'm calling on all the governors across the country to ban non-citizens from voting through state legislation and to support the SAVE Act. This is Republican governors and Democrat governors. Just in the last week, our South Carolina Freedom Caucus found out that paperwork for voter registration was given to non-citizens. That legislature quickly and swiftly passed a bill, and the governor signed a ban on non-citizens from voting. Our Missouri Freedom Caucus is pushing legislation that could be signed any day that would ban non-citizens from voting on ballot initiatives. And this is breaking news. Our Montana Freedom Caucus this morning handed papers to the Secretary of State to call a special session to address this specific issue of banning non-citizens from voting. I want all state lawmakers to go to our website, sign the letter in support of the SAVE Act. I want all the governors to act immediately to pass legislation in their 50 states. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Senator Lee. Thank you, Congressman Roy. And thank you, Speaker Johnson, for heading this. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you.
My name's Hogan Gidley. I'm the Vice Chair of the Center for Election Integrity at the America First Policy Institute. Mr. Speaker, Congressman Roy, Senator Lee, thank you so much for organizing this today. Our mission at the Center for Election Integrity is very clear and it's very simple. Make it easy to vote, but hard to cheat. And thanks to the SAVE Act, we're well on our way to doing just that. It is dangerous lunacy to ignore the law and allow people who are not American citizens to vote in American elections. The Biden administration has allowed in tens of millions of people into this country illegally. It's a Biden invasion. Everyone knows that. No one disputes it. And at the same time, the left is flooding our country with people here illegally, not by accident, but by design. They are simultaneously trying to weaken election integrity measures, voter protection measures across this country. You should ask yourself, or better yet, you should ask the left, why do they want to prevent you from proving you are who you say you are when you cast a ballot? Why do they want to stop the attempt to have signature verification methods in place in these states? Why would you ever dream of putting an open ballot box out in public and then fight to have anyone monitor what goes in that ballot box? This invasion is exactly why we at the America First Policy Institute has just sent letters to election officials in 9 states, most with massive illegal immigrant populations, to ask them and put them on notice. What are you doing to prevent illegal aliens from registering to vote in your states? Now, this is no doubt a state-level fight, but thankfully, the federal government is now saying it's our fight too. And I, for one, am so proud to stand here with the Speaker, with the Congressman, with the Senator, and bring awareness to the SAVE Act, which is a vital part of election integrity and the effort to protect legal votes and legal voters. Because when it comes to American elections, we have to put Americans first, always. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. I want to acknowledge there's three other champions for this issue standing behind us, members of Congress. You have Representatives Fallon and Dr. Babb and Randy Weber. And they are here because they represent the state of Texas, and this is an unprecedented, clear, and present danger in the state of Texas. But they will be the first to tell you, and we will attest, and all of us will tell you, this is not just a Texas issue. Every state is a border state now. And I'll take a couple questions, but I want to acknowledge one thing very important at the outset. Because people ask us all the time, why hasn't Congress been able to close the border? You may have noticed in the House, we've been working on it every single day since the Republicans took control of this Congress in this term. We have passed H.R. 2, our signature Secure the Border Act, which would be the most comprehensive border reform and border security act in generations, probably ever. And we passed it now 14 months ago. It is sitting on Senator Schumer's desk in the Democrat-controlled Senate. We passed resolution after resolution. We impeached Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Why? Why the first cabinet secretary impeachment in the history of the United States? Because it's that bad, and desperate times call for desperate measures. But you saw what happened to the House doing our constitutional duty. It got quickly dispensed with in the Senate. No impeachment over there. They didn't convict him of that. They tried to brush it off. Every single thing that we have done, and we fight for it every single day, and you'll continue to see us fight for it. This is one of the measures to try to take care of this catastrophe that the Biden administration and Mayorkas have engineered and done by design. The answer ultimately to the question of why Congress can't close the border is because we don't have the authority. Even if H.R. 2 was to be passed in the Senate and signed into law by President Biden, we all know they would not enforce it. They do not enforce existing federal law. The federal immigration law is ignored. It is flouted on a daily basis. That is why the election cycle is so critically important. That is why you must elect a president like Donald J. Trump who will close the border. But between now and then, Congress has an affirmative obligation, a constitutional responsibility under Article 1, Section 4 to take care of this problem. And the SAVE Act is one of the most immediate and urgent things that we can do. That's why we're here. That's why we're going to push this aggressively, and that's why we'll get everybody on record on whether they agree with the sentiments that have been expressed today. You have a few questions, we'll take them. No. So actually on the first question, I mean, the answer is that it's unanswerable. That is the problem. States are not allowed right now to prove if somebody claims on that simple form that they're a citizen, they can vote. They're not allowed to prove whether it's true or not. We all know intuitively that a lot of illegals are voting in federal elections, but it's not been something that is easily provable. We don't have that number. This legislation will allow us to do exactly that. It will prevent that from happening, and if someone tries to do it, it will now be unlawful, and the states will have a mechanism to prove whether they are or not. And to suggest that this is some sort of revenge tour is kind of a silly notion. What we are doing, and what we explained here over and over, is that we have a constitutional responsibility. We have an obligation to the people that we are elected to represent, to every citizen in this country, to ensure that our elections are secure. That should not be, as was said earlier, a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. It should not be partisan. 85 or 86% of Americans agree that this is something that should be a top priority, and those who haven't answered conclusively on that poll haven't yet paid attention to it. I think they will soon, and we're trying to avert an absolute disaster, and this is a responsible measure for us to take. Other questions? What we're talking about today is the 2024 election. Nobody can go back and relitigate what happened in 2020. We know that there was ballot harvesting. We know that there was mail-in ballots. It was the COVID election. There was all sorts of irregularity occasioned by the pandemic, where states haphazardly put together new laws and opened up the systems and led to all sorts of confusion and chaos and concern that lingers even to today. So what Congress has a responsibility to do is take care of that problem. We are supposed to step into this breach and fill it with responsible legislation. That's what this is. That's what the American people demand and deserve, and that's what we're going to do. That's why we're here today. One more question, Scott? is not a messaging bill. This is one of the most substantive, as Senator Lee said, one of the most important pieces of legislation that we'll be presented with in our lifetime, in our congressional careers. This is at the essence of what it means to have a constitutional republic. If the people cannot rely upon their election system, the integrity of that system, then we have nothing. We have to do this, and so we'll do it out of the House, and we'll send it to the Senate, and we'll let Chuck Schumer decide whether he agrees with that sentiment or not. We're not doing this for messaging purposes. Yeah, Chip.
I'll let Mike answer that real quick. But Scott, look, this is not a messaging exercise. The American people want this. And I think one question you should ask yourself, if we put on the floor of the the floor of the House, a bill that would put into law, existing law, okay, the existing law which requires only citizens to vote, do you think our House colleagues today would support that? It was bipartisan in the past. But this is the question. The Democrats in the Senate and our Democratic colleagues in the House, they don't want it. This is going to be a clear delineation. The American people overwhelmingly on a bipartisan basis want us to ensure that only citizens vote. Current law says that. But the fact is, there are numerous states who want to work in opposition to that. Like, look in Arizona right now. Arizona's law currently has two different systems because federal law prohibits them from checking citizenship. They require citizenship for their state elections. We're trying to make sure we straighten that out, get the federal government out of the way to allow states to do it, but go a step further to say that for federal elections, for the President of the United States and for Congress, where we have the clear congressional authority to do so, to simply require it. That is not an objectionable thing for us to do. So if it doesn't get passed through the Senate, it will be because Democrats are making a very clear statement, like my friend Stephen Miller said, that they don't believe in that principle. This is very simple. Should only citizens vote in the United States of America in federal elections? We're going to call the question, and we'll see where they land.
I'd like to just address this briefly since my chamber of Congress has been mentioned. I'd like to know the basis for the assumption built into your question that this will not pass the Senate. I would love to know what your basis is. And of course, you don't know that. You can't know that. We won't know that unless or until we try to do that. This is not some kind of Rube Goldberg design trap. This is not a fancy piece of legislation. Congressman Roy and I have written this thing to be very narrow, to be very narrowly tailored, respecting the sovereignty of the states. It applies specifically to federal voter election rolls, those eligible to vote in federal elections. It is very simple. It is elegant in what it does. And so I really would like to know what your basis for assuming that it will go nowhere in the Senate, which would mean that no Democrats wanted to support it, or an insufficient number of Democrats would support it, and most or all of them would oppose it such that it couldn't come up for a vote, and that if it somehow did, that it would fail. I'd also like to push back on what their argument would be. This is why I understand the premise of the question, because it doesn't seem like a Democratic priority. Otherwise, it would be, and we'd all know about it. But it begs the question, when we try to push this up for a vote, whether attached as an amendment to another piece of legislation or through unanimous consent, trying to set up a vote for it or something else, if you are proven correct in the end that the Democrats oppose it, on what basis would they oppose it? Do any of them have a stated objective of undoing existing federal law, making it unlawful, making it criminal for a non-citizen, especially an illegal alien, from voting in a U.S. election, in a U.S. federal election? Surely they're not disputing that that's the law. I'm not aware of any of them trying to undo that law, saying that that law is a miscarriage of justice. So if they're not trying to undo that law, but they oppose this law, what does that mean? I'll tell you exactly what it means. It's that they're just fine if that's the position they take in this. And I honestly don't think the script has been written on this yet. I'm not willing to assume that all of, or most of, or even the majority of my Democratic colleagues are content with that being dead letter law. I'd like to see them explain that position to their constituents. I'm familiar with very, very few of them who could or would do so with a straight face and thereafter expect to be voted back into office, having taken that truly, extraordinarily, obscenely extreme position. Look, this is so fundamental to who we are as a country, to our ability to operate, that there is no valid basis upon which you could oppose this. It would be insane. Nats Field, just a few blocks away from here. If you want to go to a Washington Nationals game, you're going to have to go through a ticket taker, through a turnstile, who will take your ticket. Those lines, those seats inside, they're reserved for ticket holders only. If they just started assuming that somebody with a wink and a nod, having signed a piece of paper saying, yeah, I've got tickets, could go to the game, the whole experience at Nats Field would be very different indeed. Of course, nobody in the real world operates that way. The United States government, when determining who should occupy these seats of our own government, should be no less rigorous, no less vigilant in making sure that the right people are getting in and the right people are choosing who gets to occupy these positions than they are at Nats Field, at Busch Gardens, at Disneyland, or anywhere else. Thanks.
I don't know why it wouldn't pass in the Senate. 87% of Americans agree that we should require proof of citizenship to register to vote in this country. And that includes 82% of people who approve of President Biden and 76% of people who identify as Democrats. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an American issue. And I don't understand why we would assume automatically that it won't pass and that Congress won't do what's right for the American people. We have a man who is here today who is a naturalized citizen, and he supports requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. And I've talked to immigrants who are here legally who also support proof of citizenship to register to vote, some who have become citizens and some who have not. This issue crosses the political divide, and very few things do that in this sharply divided country today. Why can't Congress do what's right for America for once and quit being so dysfunctional?
Thank you for your time today. Thanks for all these champions for election security. The SAVE Act is a very important measure, as we've announced, and it's going to not only save the integrity of our election system, but help us save America. Thanks for being here today. Thanks, Mike.